Why are video game bodies so absurd? The exaggeration of video game bodies is, well, kind of hard to miss. Men tend to be beefcakes of Herculean proportions, and the women can make even Jessica Rabbit look downright conservative. In a lot of ways, this makes sense. Like comic books, the fantastical proportions of video game characters often reflect their unrealistic and fantastical worlds. Or at least that's the purported reasoning behind the stylistic choices of Dead or Alive, Bayonetta, and Dragon's Crown. But the hyper-idealized bodies are not the stylistic exceptions in games. They're the rule, even when photorealism is supposedly the goal. A lot of times, these extreme proportions flat out do not match the content, setting, or context of the game, and that can get pretty weird pretty fast. There's always exceptions to the rule, of course, and luckily that list keeps growing for games. The Tomb Raider reboot is just one example of rethinking body conventions to make a game better. And for those who argue that hyper-idealized bodies make more money, keep in mind that the 2013 reboot was the best selling in the franchise. And yet, hyper-idealized bodies still remain the gold standard, and it's important for us to remember exactly what we're communicating with them. Don't get me wrong, most popular media perpetuates body stigma of some shape or size, but games and cartoons are unique. Their bodies aren't animated by the laws of nature, but by human beings. And being human, animators bring in all sorts of unconscious biases into their work without realizing it. In fact, a lot of successful animators even appeal to our own unconscious biases about primitive shapes. Ex-Sony character artist Chris Solarski says smart designers should use the psychological associations we have with circles, squares, and triangles. The dynamic movement of a circle expresses innocence, energy, youth, and femininity. Squares are immovable, indicating mature stability, balance, or stubbornness. Triangles are the strongest shapes, conveying brute force and aggression. These mental shorthands are everywhere in character design. Take Mario and Friends. Mario is a round man of dynamic energy. Luigi in the supporting role is rectangular and balanced. Wario embodies the brute force of the triangle. These kinds of shorthands have helped create tons of our favorite characters. In Gears of War, for example, hulking square body types even add functionality. Your eye is drawn to the player character's armor as the most stable shape amidst the chaos of an encounter. Here comes the but though. Literally, often these psychological associations can get out of hand, especially in the portrayal of women. Because yes, male bodies are extreme and idealized in games, but in 2013, 84% of all video game animators were male, and in most cases, they were creating idealized bodies that appeal to male audiences. So remember those unconscious biases from earlier? Imagine 84% of those biases are coming from men who just have less experience with female bodies. You only need to look at the state of breast physics to see how uncomfortable this can get. It's also important to remember that not all ideal bodies are created equally. Different ideals reinforce the different power dynamics for men and women. Here's what I mean. Ideal male body types usually exaggerate the inverted triangle, emphasizing the character's aggressive power, agency, and capability. But the conventional ideal female body rarely communicates power, agency, or ability. In fact, logically, a lot of the conventions would get in the way of those things. Like, come on, did we really need to add heels to Zero Suit Samus? Heels? Ideal female bodies in video games fit weirdly specific standards. Scantily clad, long-legged, thin-waisted. That's not about shape association. That's about appealing to heterosexual men. Let's put it this way. If male bodies were treated like female bodies, we'd have a lot more male eye candy, dressed in clothing that accentuates male assets, if you know what I mean. Instead, Square Enix recently redesigned a male Final Fantasy character because his outfit was deemed too sexy. But would they ever cover up a female character for that exact reason? Another key difference between extreme male versus female bodies is the visible lack of diversity. Men can be hulking, agile, stocky, lanky, attractive, ugly, or just your average nondescript dude. But unless a woman is the antagonist or mother figure, they're almost always beautiful, unscarred, thin, blemish-free, and make-upped. To be fair, lack of diversity in animated female characters isn't just a video game problem. Disney recently got outed for having a vast range of male faces and body types while basically replicating the same female one over and over again. Tiny nose, round face, big eyes, and thin bodies. Lino DeSalvo, head of animation on Frozen, even said that animating women is harder because you have to convey emotions while still keeping the character pretty. I hope my sarcasm is coming through. And remember when Ubisoft gave a similar excuse last year? They said including female assassins in a multiplayer mode would be double the animation work and just too expensive. Well, ex-Assassin's Creed animator Jonathan Cooper pointed out that Ubisoft had already made a female assassin without a lot of effort. Aveline from Liberation reused most of Connor's animations from Assassin's Creed 3, and she was awesome. But in Ubisoft's mind, the standard industry practice for customizable female avatars is to exaggerate hip movement, butt sway, and sexy idol poses. BioWare apparently thinks the same way. Just look at this Dragon Age mod that ports female animations into a male character model. And are we even getting this ideal male fantasy thing right anyway? Several studies show that when it comes to guessing what the opposite sex finds appealing, we all tend to exaggerate. Women overstate the degree of thinness men find most attractive, while men do the same with muscularity. One survey from a British clothing company even found that most women prefer the slightly doughy boy next door look to the chiseled hunk type. And while we're on the subject of realistic body fat, let's talk about the issue we hardly ever address in games. While 2/3 of American adults are overweight and or obese, overweight human character models are almost non-existent in game worlds. At the Game Developers Conference this year, Professor Todd Harper gave a talk about how when fat characters do exist, they reinforce horrible stereotypes that shame lots of people. Wario, Fat Princess, Justine D'Angelo from Shadows of the Damned, who, let's not forget, was an opera singer who killed herself to become thin and beautiful. Fat characters are never the hero. They're always the farting, gross, lazy villain, or they're the butt of the joke, always thinking about food or presented as delusional in their self-confidence. Now, I'm not saying that these depictions are exclusive to games. They're huge cultural issues, and luckily game designers are actively making efforts to represent more diverse bodies. After Overwatch got criticism for only featuring women with the same idealized body type, Blizzard responded by adding Zarya, an awesome female tank character. Zarya shows us that fantastical representations and diverse body types are not mutually exclusive, because what I'm asking for isn't necessarily realism. It's about scope. We have to consider whose fantasies we're including and who we're excluding. Like, what about female fantasies, or the fantasy of being overweight and a hero? Ultimately, rethinking how we represent body standards isn't about depriving or censoring games. It's about adding to their variety and creativity to make games better for everyone. So what do you think? Why are character body types the way that they are? And could more diverse body types be just as much fun and just as successful as the status quo? Hash it out in the comments, and if you like what you saw, please subscribe. I'll see you next week. Last week we talked about feminism, myself, and my life. Let's see what you had to say. Conren asked why I don't call myself a male gamer, and a couple others of you asked why I don't call myself a humanist or an egalitarian, the idea being that those are maybe more comprehensive terms than the term feminist. The reason why is because feminism addresses a very particular issue, which is the status of women in the world in which we live, not just in the world of games, and it deals with a specific set of issues that are specific to how women are treated. So that's why I think the term feminism, or being a feminist, is incredibly important. I'm also an egalitarian. I would like to think I believe in equality. However, I feel like feminism as a term is the most effective way to describe the current condition in which we live. Sasha Sexy Fur, hello there, sees some irony in the fact that I used Bayonetta as an example of sexist characters in games. And I should point out that Bayonetta, much like Barbarella before her or Elvira, has been the subject of a lot of debate amongst people in the feminist community, specifically about whether or not Bayonetta, on the one hand, as some feminists believe, is a victim of what's called the male gaze. It's just a sexualized character that's eye candy, or whether Bayonetta uses her sexuality in an empowering sort of way. So I tend to come down on the other side. I don't necessarily buy the argument that I think that she's sort of in control, just given the larger context I described in this episode and in past ones. However, I understand that there's a wide variety of opinions on the subject, and that's a really good thing. Jess Bennett left a really heartfelt comment, specifically that she's sick and tired of being pointed out as being a woman who plays games, or people feeling like she's like beckoning for attention. I think it gives a really powerful kind of personal note to some of the issues that we're talking about. That this idea of sort of equality between genders in games is not this like sort of abstract thought, but it has like very specific real world consequences. I got a bunch of emails from people who necessarily didn't feel like they wanted to comment, but from women who are saying that they often change their avatars to be male characters so that they don't get harassed. And there's a lot of masking that's going on, and I feel like my hope long term is that the more we talk about these sorts of issues, it will create an environment in which it's safer for women like Jess to play out in public. Camo Roback says that as a gay male, he was sort of hoping for male versions of Booth Babes because it would be nice to have real hunks at a place like E3. Yeah, maybe that'll happen.